third in a series of lectures on African and African American science. Tonight I'm going to be dealing with Egyptian science, but it's impossible to discuss this without first dealing with the Egyptian itself. Who is the ancient Egyptian? I've just come from a conference in Dallas. It was the best attended black conference since the Nile Valley Conference in 1984. We had an audience of at least 2,000. This conference attracted a tremendous amount of attention because there is a great battle going on in Dallas over the Ramses II exhibition. Many people are filing in from all over the world to have a look at this, and blacks are completely excluded in the sense that they're supposed to have nothing to do with it. They're supposed to have no relationship whatsoever to that early Egyptian. And the Egyptian Minister of Culture, in fact, made a statement saying that he doesn't want to get involved, the Egyptians do not want to get involved in this black thing over here because Ramses II is beyond black or white. And in fact, he made the statement further that Africans have nothing to do with his Egyptian culture. Now, the point I made was that he is speaking the truth. We have nothing to do with his culture because he's not an African. It is very important to understand that. The Egyptian Minister of Culture today is not an African. It is like if ex-President Reagan got up to speak for the Native American. The Native American is not in Washington. He's very rare there. He is found in Central Mexico, Central America rather. He's found in South America. We have to understand that in relation to modern Egypt. You can go into Cairo and you can sit in a room as you sit here, and there are no native Egyptians. There are Egyptians, but they're modern Egyptians. Do not confuse the modern Egyptian with the native Egyptian who built the pyramids. As you go further down towards the south, even in the north itself of Egypt today, you can find a great number of black African people. But many people that you see in Egypt today are not native to the place. This is true of America. Many Americans are white. The Native American is not white. Many Americans are late Asiatics like the Japanese, the Chinese, etc. The Native American may have had some element of Japanese and Chinese, but the Native American is not Japanese or Chinese. So we have to be extremely careful about that. In fact, not until 1830, as late as 1830, no one seriously in Europe doubted that the early Egyptian was a black African. The Europeans who had seen him, the Europeans who had entered that country, the Greeks, the first great Europeans, the Europeans who had defeated the Egyptians, the Europeans who had entered that civilization, made it quite clear they were dealing with black people. They said it again and again whenever there was necessity to say it. They made it clear in their documents. Herodotus said quite clearly, these are black-skinned people with woolly hair. When, however, in 1974 at the UNESCO conference, Sheikh Anta Diop went to great pains to show that his melanin dosage test had been developed to establish that the melanin content between the derm and the epiderm showed clearly that the mummies examined in the Museum of Man were black-skinned. Abdullah, the Egyptian delegate, jumped up. Nobody else got so upset except the Egyptian who is not native. Jumped up and said, even if they're black-skinned, they're whites. It was very important to him to say that. Now, I'm not attacking the Arab because the Arab, in fact, joining with the black African, the Arabian type, that is, because 100 million blacks speak Arabic. Okay, don't get confused with people speaking Arabic and Arabs, because many people who are not Arabs speak Arabic, and the Arab script, for example, was created by an African, Abul Aswan. Okay, so I'm going to use the term Arabian type because the Arab could be black or white. just like the Jew could be black or white. And in fact, many of the original Jews were black. It's the later Jews who were white. So we have to be very careful what period we are dealing with. Okay, now it is very important to understand why the concern. Why are we talking about Egypt? Why is it so important? Why does it always arouse such strong emotions? Nothing arouses stronger emotions in academic circles today than the discussion of Egypt. Even in my university, when I was introducing black civilizations as a course, and I included Egypt, history professors got up and said, why are you putting Egypt in black civilizations? It's not supposed to be there. It's in Africa, yes, but it is not African. And that's valid. The fact that it is in Africa doesn't make it African, because there are parts of Africa today that are not controlled by Africans. Okay, so that you have, the fact that it is in Africa itself doesn't make it African, because it's open to the Mediterranean, it's open to Asia. And the argument therefore was that since black people are inferior and cannot found civilizations, those people who were on the borders invaded, came in and created the civilization and lifted the poor benighted black up into civilization. And that argument did not have any validity until the slave trade reached a certain point where the black was profoundly disadvantaged. He'd been excluded from everything, so that when they discovered that Egypt had had such a profound influence on European civilization, its science in particular, its philosophy, its all of its great concepts, the black could have nothing to do with it. Perhaps it's these people on the borders who came in and built this civilization. But when we go back to the Pyramid Age, and you will learn something tonight that is very astonishing, which I only became aware of, in fact, a few months ago, in connection with the Japanese trying to build the pyramid. That we are not dealing with inferior blacks. We are dealing with blacks at the very top of the world. And the reason why we are going back is for two main reasons. One, we who come out of a shattered world can be made whole again by bringing the pieces of our heritage together. And secondly, it is because we can establish on scientific grounds that man is not inferior or superior, that his equality is not built in any biblical fantasy or liberal sentiment. It is rooted in hard historical realities. What we have in evidence before us is an overwhelming body of things that establish that early Egyptian as African. Sheikh Antoniop, who appeared before the UNESCO conference in 1974, established after hours presenting a vast body of evidence showing the intimate interconnections and threads to inner Africa, showing that everything Egyptian is African. Its language in particular, which had been classified as Afro-Asiatic, Afro-Hamitic, Afro-Semitic, Afro-this and that it was African. For the first time in 200 years, a world body agreed that they could not argue with that anymore. The evidence was overwhelming. The Egyptian language was established as an African language. Those elements that came in much later, the invaders, the interlopers who introduced certain Semitic and Asiatic elements, those things did not alter the fundamental structure of the language. They were just superficial elements that came in later. Diop showed that the totems were African. He showed that the culture was African. Many of their rituals and customs, their beliefs, their ideals were African. And he showed the traces. He could go back into the heartland, the birthplace. And as Gerald Massey had shown, the word Africa comes from Afroika, an Egyptian word meaning beginnings. And do you know how it came to be Africa? When the Arabs invaded, it was changed to Ifriqiya. and then the Romans changed it to Africa, and so that is how we have Africa. Africa, in fact, is the only continent that ever named itself. Europe did not name itself. Europe comes from an African princess called Europa. America did not name itself. America was named by that Genoese, not the Genoese, adventurer, the friend of Christopher Columbus, Amerigo Vespucci. That's not the name of America, that's not the name of Europe. And Africa was given all sorts of names like Ethiopia, Libya, etc. Africa is the true name of Africa. The word for south, for example, the people of the south of Egypt, the word is Kenti. It not only means south, it means the first, it means origin, it means foremost. And the Egyptians, as Diop showed, the Egyptians called themselves Kemu, the black people, Kemet, the black land. And they saw anything that was divine, whatever your range of color, because the black, the original black, the unmixed black ranges in colors, whatever the color of the black, when it was made, when the man or woman was made into god or goddess, it had to be absolutely black, because black was the color of divinity. Now, why would the Egyptians get so involved with that if they were white people or they were Asiatic types or Semitic types? Diop showed a range of other things. He showed that the crania, the skulls that had been examined by William McIver, the Oxford team, by Falkenberger, they said that only 36% of the ancient Egyptians were Negroid. By Negroid they mean you cannot be called Negroid unless you have a very large flat nose, very full lips, high cheekbones. Now that was the classical Negroid type. But there are many variations from that type, even without intermixture. Even without intermixture, you have different types of Africans. But they said that if you found anything but that type, it had to be a brown Mediterranean. In other words, they were trying to show that they had to be intermixed with Europeans in order to create civilization. Diop showed, and Kugler showed, and others showed that when you, Chatterjee and Kumar showed that when you go to the skulls in the graveyards of Africa, south of Egypt, and even in Central Africa, and you compared it with the skulls in the early dynastic period of Egypt when the pyramids were built, and you compare it with the skulls in the Middle Kingdom, and you compare it with skulls even later, you are finding the African type. So whether it was blood, or whether it was skin color, or whether it was shape of skull, you're still dealing with the African. And then to crown it all, this was the missing link. Bruce Williams and Keith Seal discovered in 1962 a pharaonic dynasty known as Tarseti on the edge of the Sudan at a place called Qustul, Q-U-S-T-U-L. This is a very important find. It's the most important find that has been made in the field of African civilizations. It's the most important find that has been made over the last 300 years. The discovery that the pharaohs did not begin in Egypt, that the pharaohs began in Nubia. They found 12 black pharaohs reigning at Tarseti even before the first pharaoh appeared in the first dynasty of Egypt. Aha or Scorpion or Narma-Menes, they found pharaohs in the Sudan. And above all, and this is very important to find at Tarseti, they discovered that the blacks on the edge of the Sudan were already using the hieroglyphs. The world's most important writing system, the hieroglyphs, were already being used by the blacks at Tarseti at least 2 centuries before they took it up into Egypt. I have shown other things. In my book, They Came Before Columbus, I pointed to the fact that when the Sahara began to dry up, one of the great cataclysms of the world, which brought the lakes in Africa in some places 100 feet lower, the Africans began to retreat from the Saharan world, which was once a lush world. We have found pictures of Africans in chariots thousands of years ago, long before Europe had a civilization, hunting in chariots. It's drawn on the Saharan walls. The Sahara suffered a cataclysm. The Africans began to retreat. And I pointed out, as only a few people in the world pointed out, that on the basis of the linguistic evidence, on the basis of the spread of linguistic networks, on the basis of the movement of scripts, on the basis of the skeletons that were found along that line, moving away from the Sahara as it dried up, that they were moving along shrinking floodplains, and they must have been following rivers. And those rivers were connected to tributaries of the Nile Valley. 3.5 years ago, the space agency tested my theory. They sent down microwave beams 16 feet below the African earth, and there they found the very rivers I was talking about, where I said they would be. They found the ancient riverbeds running underneath the Sahara, beneath the earth. It could not be seen on the ground, it was seen from outer space. They saw the riverbeds running, linking up with the tributaries of the Nile Valley, thereby establishing an ancient connection between inner Africa and Egypt. Colin Wilson, the anthropologist, even found that the Ik in Uganda were speaking Middle Egyptian. And as I pointed out, in the agricultural system of the Sudan lay the roots of Egyptian agriculture. The tamarind fruit, cultivated cotton, Gossypium herbaceum, the bottle gourd, Laganaria caesarea, the oil palm fruit, the watermelon, all of these things were found in Egypt. If other people were making Egypt, where are their plants? The whole thing was absurd. Whether you dealt with skin, color, or whether you dealt with culture, or whether you dealt with language, you found the African. And the most extraordinary evidence of the schizophrenia, the blindness that has entered the world, came when Professor Jean Vercouter, an excellent anthropologist, jumped up and said, okay, it is true that the language is African, the writing is African, the culture is African, the techno-complex or technology, as Saf Soderbergh had pointed out, is African. The point is that we still don't know how many of them were real Africans. Now, if he had done that with Europeans, they would go crazy. But we wouldn't be able to say that. We would just be dismissed. Because they have that power over the media, they can make absurd statements like that. And everybody got angry. Why are you bringing up blackness? What does blackness have to do with this serious subject of history? It doesn't matter whether they were black, white, or blue. We are dealing with history. All along, all the history books, even today, are crowded with these non-black types, mixed with Hamites and Semites, and all sorts of people. But as soon as you try to establish, no, you're dealing with the real African here. Why are you talking about race? Why are you bringing race into it? You know the Journal of African, I edit the Journal of African Civilization, but there's a journal, an international journal called Journal of African History. It wrote an article lately saying that Van Sertima is a racist. Why am I a racist? Because I am trying to show that the black African played a major role in civilization. Why I'm so concerned about the black African? We are concerned not because we are racist, but because we are fighting racism. We are concerned. We are concerned because we are not judged fairly in terms of individual merit. We have not yet entered a world that just. We are judged on our phenotypes, how large the nose, how black the skin, etc. This type of man has contributed nothing to society, but inferior intellectually. There are big debates about that now, very recent. So do not think for one moment that we are going to forget it, because we didn't bring it up. It is foisted upon us. We have no way. We have no choice. I went and I was invited not only to speak to the great audience, I had to speak to a special audience of executives in Dallas who wanted to know what this fuss was about. And I pointed out to them, look here, we're living in a global village. We cannot afford these fatal polarities. And that we are not here to try and show that the European did nothing. Everybody knows he did a lot. That's all we hear about. What we're here to show is that we don't have to beg you to think that we're equal. We have proof that we're equal. And we just want you to look again at your history. Take off your blindfolds and you will see equal people walking upon the earth. That therefore is where the whole thing is. We're not getting into Egypt because we want to dwell on fantasies. We're getting into Egypt because we want to return to the true reality of the world. It is unbalanced. It is sick because we are the victims of a grave fantasy, a grotesque fantasy. When the black woman is raped, no big press conference. The white woman is raped, everybody alarmed, kill them, kill them. The reason for that is because we have a deep thing that has become part of our consciousness, that the white matters. His civilization, his values, his skin, his people matter, but we don't matter. It's like in that book on Huckleberry Finn, when somebody ran up, they heard a great commotion. What happened? Nothing. Just 2 niggers got killed. Doesn't matter, nothing has happened. A nigger got raped, that's not important. So that we have got to fight this, because at the root of prejudice is the vision of the world. The vision that we have come to accept, these are the givens. Therefore it's not a little academic issue, it is a matter of life and death. What we were fighting in Dallas, it's not about any little exhibition. We were fighting against something that is deep in the psyche of our world, something that is sick, something that has made us victims, something that has driven some of us so crazy that we want to make other people victims like ourselves, something that has made us victims of our own race, something that has made us victims of so many things. That is why this history is important. I am not going to talk about it in the passionless voice of an academic, because it's no academic issue to me. It's too real. Bernal has written a book called Black Athena. Bernal is a very extraordinary man. He was a Don at Cambridge. That's the furthest you could go in the Western world in terms of academia. He's also a master of Chinese. He's written a book called Black Athena, in which he shows that one of the pharaohs, one of the black pharaohs, founded Athens, the major city in Greece. All the Greeks came into Egypt, even as today, out of my shattered world, I had to go to Europe to study, to mislearn about my heritage. And then later, using what I had, to learn all over again by myself. I am my own university. Even then, in the reverse way, did the Greeks go into Africa. Thales of Miletus, and I love to make it sound like a song, because some people have made songs of their suffering and songs of their achievement, and have made them the universal songs of the world. Some people have even made statements that they're the chosen ones, and that what happened to them matters more than anything else in the world. We do not want to be part of that. But we want to sing our history because it must become intimate to us. Rather than to sing the kind of empty songs many of us sing today, let us sing of the things that are still native to us, so that we could feel it deep in our guts. So when I call the names of the Greeks who came to study under us, it's like a song in my head. Thales of Miletus, Democritus, Pythagoras, Eudoxius, Anaximander, Anaximenes, Heraclitus. These are the people who came and stole and brought it back into Greece. But they were not the great thieves because many of them admitted it. It is later when Europe felt overawed by this, humbled by this, they had to go back and say, no, it's not true. These people, they had only reached a certain level in mathematics, at an empirical level, trial and error. They had not achieved mathematical genius. When you go and study Egypt, and it will take several lifetimes, because it's the only civilization that is so well preserved. No people on earth have been able to preserve their bodies as the Africans have done. If we have a chance to show slides tonight, I will show you a princess, and she's only one of many. Princess Anutawi, who died more than 4,000 years ago. You can see the texture of her skin. You can see her hair, her African hair. You can see her mouth. You can see her eyelids. 4,000 years ago. In 1964, in the University of Oklahoma, they opened the skin of an African princess who had died thousands of years ago, Princess Mimi. And they said she was so well preserved that the cells within her hand could be put in a solution and transplanted. We're not dealing with the kind of mediocrity that we have become accustomed to and take for granted in ourselves in a world where we have been inferiorized, because that is really the key to it. We are not inferior, we have been inferiorized. And the only way we can move away from that feeling of inferiority and that kind of performance that is mediocre and inferior is becoming aware of what can correct this, because that is really where the universe is. Don't tell me because it is too late. There's never too late. Man has just begun his journey. There's nothing that is too late. This is the universe. This is never late. This is timeless. This is consciousness. Don't tell me any nonsense about how AIDS are going to kill us by the year 2000. That is nonsense. AIDS is a joke compared to what struck Europe. The Black Death killed 50% of Europeans. AIDS will never kill 50% of the world's people. By the time it reaches that point, they would find a solution to it. In Europe, the way they would go to collect garbage in the morning, they would go to collect corpses. That was how terrible the Black Death was, worse than AIDS. There was not a single family that did not lose half of its people during the time of the Black Death. And they didn't have our technology. Those early Europeans, they couldn't sit in the lab and find out what germ started this, what system it is hitting, where to hit it back, and things like that, which is what we're doing in our struggle to deal with it. Don't give me these gloomy stories. Black people have reached into the darkness so deeply. All they want to hear is darkness. You can't grow out of darkness. You have to become aware of your horror, because it brings an anger which can charge you and change you. But do not let it overwhelm you. You have to balance that terror with hope. Hope springs from the past. Hope has to be brought into the present by a genuine conscious effort. If all you have is darkness, if all you have is the memory and knowledge of gloom, if you never struggle to move out of that gloom, you will be crushed, because it is darkness that kills, not AIDS. It is hopelessness that destroys a race. You have to know that there is something happening in the world that is unusually hopeful. It is not an accident that it is in this very time that that is happening. We have found so many things that startle us. Look at the Japanese. Everybody thinks, the Asiatic. Now we're finding the Asiatic has the finest brain. The Japanese is very sophisticated. He's superior. The Japanese were humbled a few years ago. The Japanese went to Egypt, our country, and tried to build a pyramid. Everybody said that in the early stages, all we had were handmade tools. Sheikh Anta Diop, the Senegalese physicist, the greatest of living African historians, he's dead now, the greatest 20th century African historian, he pointed out that an iron hoe had been found in the interstices of the Great Pyramid, and he pointed to other iron objects, and he showed that there had to have an advanced smelting process in order to cut the stone. I went to Egypt last summer, and that was something that I wanted to see with my living eyes. I watched that stone, I watched that granite, I watched the quarries at Aswan, and I looked at the standardization of the stone. And I said to myself, how on earth could these people cut this stone with copper and bronze tools? It is impossible. But the Japanese, they decided to cut the stone with the best of handmade tools from ancient times. The tools broke. Do you know what the Japanese had to do? They had to use air jackhammers, 20th century technology, in order to cut the stone. Then they said, everybody thought, all they had to do now, the Egyptians, now the Africans with their muscles, picks up this stone and put it on the barges. The Japanese tried to put it on the barges capsized. Now they're dealing with 2-ton stones. The Africans didn't just deal with 2-ton stones, they went up to 50-ton stones. The Japanese, using 2-ton stones, could not get them on the barges without the barges capsizing. So they had to use 20th century technology, steamboats. So now they said, all right, we got our air jackhammers and we got our steamboats, let us proceed. Then they got to the shore and tried to take the stone out to the sand in the desert to put up the little pyramid. Do you know what happened? The stone sank in the mud. Then they dragged it out of the mud, then it sank in the sand. They had to find 20th century cranes, the power cranes, in order to drag the bloody thing out of the sand. Then they tried to put it in alignment. It chipped, it cracked, it broke. Then they brought the helicopters. Couldn't put it in alignment. Then they went back and looked with humility at what the early Africans had done. Do you know the casing stones of the Great Pyramid? Not a single one of them is chipped or cracked or scratched. And do you know what is the alignment the Africans achieved in those early times, which the Japanese today, the best in modern technology, cannot achieve? 1/1000th of an inch of mathematical perfection in the alignment of the stones. The only people today who achieve that precision are jewelers with microscopes cutting fine gems. Do you know what happened? The modern Egyptians would call these people in, they chased them out. They left a terrible mess in the desert, all these pieces of stone and holes and all sorts of things like that. They chased them out. So do not think you are dealing with something that people are going to come to terms with easily. There's a big effort still. I had to deal with a lot of professors. When I was called on the radio, I said, look, I don't have any time. When I get to the conference, I will talk. No, Dr. Van Sertima, we want to know if Ramesses II is a black man. I said I don't want to comment on Ramesses II until we come to the conference, but I want to give you evidence that the Egyptian civilization in that early critical period was black and dominated by blacks. Do you know how they reported it in the newspaper? Van Sertima said that the race of Ramesses II was uncertain. Anyway, he didn't get away with it because I exposed him when I got to Dallas. Just that the Egyptian Minister of Culture is not going to get away with it either. Because when my wife and I were in Cairo last year, we decided to take pictures of wigs in the Cairo Museum. Now there are two things you can use to prove the early Egyptians were black. Take skin from the mummies, which is what Diop did, using the melanin dosage test, or go to the book X-raying the Pharaohs, where they have microfiche things of the pharaohs, and there's a special photographic process where you can actually see what the mummy looked like. They're black. They would not allow us to see the mummies anymore. You're not allowed to see the mummies. They said, Sadat said that it is not a good thing. It is humiliating. It is grotesque. Poor Sadat. What Sadat said, I could repeat. Sadat said when he was here, I'm a black man, and I'm the first true pharaoh in 2,000 years. And he said that because he knows that his mother was Sudanic. He is one of the few of them who could claim to be a real Egyptian. He never had anything to say about the mummies. They didn't want us to photograph those wigs. That's the museum, the great museum of the world. Everybody in the world goes to Egypt. That is the beginnings of great civilization. And yet, catalogued as everything was, the wigs were not catalogued. My wife and I were photographing those wigs for half an hour. Here comes this roly-poly gentleman walking straight up into my vision. And I nearly ran him over. I didn't know who he was. I didn't even see him. And considering the way he behaved afterwards, I'm sorry I didn't knock him over. He wanted to know if we had permits for our cameras. So I said, my dear fellow, how could we come in here without a permit? You can't come through the door without a camera permit. Wanted to know if my wife was using flash. I said, no. He said, is it a video camera? I said, first of all, it's not a video. And secondly, if it were, she would have a permit for it. May I see it, please? So we showed it to him. We even had to show him the passes. And then finally he couldn't create an incident, which probably is what he was trying to do. He said, okay, I'm sorry. I just want you to know that I'm the curator of the Cairo Museum. I wanted to say, big deal. And do you know who I am? But do you know what those wigs are? They're African hair braided. It's called lion's mane. Some lioness decided to braid her mate's hair. Now, could you imagine that? A lioness braiding a lion's hair? It's braided hair and they call it lion's mane. They would not put it in the catalog because those are the pieces of evidence they don't want to deal with. They don't want to deal with that. Those are the wigs that were on the pharaoh's heads at times, on the heads of priests and priestesses. And when it comes to the science, that is so startling. It's not only the pyramid that stuns us. There is a building, the largest single building on earth, even to this day. It's known as the Labyrinth. It is found near a lake. It was built in the Middle Kingdom, somewhere around 2000 BC. Do you know that it has 3,000 rooms, 1,500 rooms above and 1,500 rooms below? Herodotus tells us that. And in 1888, about 100 years ago, Petrie, the great British archaeologist, went down into this labyrinth. He says that if you were to take all the temples, the great temples and cathedrals of Europe, you could put it in that thing. Built by Africans. So that I want you to be aware of this incredible power that lies in man when man is together. We are no longer together, we are a shattered people. But we can come together. We are fragments in search of a whole. And that we can find that wholeness through becoming aware of our linkages with the consciousness of the race. We can become aware of these linkages. There's a continuity. And that is what transforms a people. And it is when consciousness is transformed that things begin to happen. Man begins to operate differently, he begins to think differently, he begins to see differently, he begins to feel differently. And seeing differently and feeling differently makes a tremendous difference to what you become. Make no mistake about it. When I was in Africa 22 years ago, in East Africa, I was a young man then. I didn't even have a degree. Yet I ended up producing a dictionary in 1 year, a dictionary in another language, a dictionary in a field that I knew nothing about, law. Why? Was it genius? No. I was out to prove a point because I had been dismissed, as my people today are. I was out to show that these great legal experts and linguists could not proceed because they had blindfolds, and that if I could only take it off a little and see a little, I would be able to do something they could not do. That is very important to understand. Remember, power does not lie in armies. The armies of the world will be disbanded within the next 25 years. That is the great armies. I'm not talking about the little armies. There are going to be little power struggles going on for a long time. But the greatest armies of the world, mark my word, the Russian and American armies will be largely disbanded within the next 25 years. Because the strength, the great strength that lies in man is a deep spiritual strength. That is the thing that reshapes the world. It starts in here. This is where the seed is. The Egyptians tell you of an initial world which was just primal matter, slowly growing to consciousness. God is consciousness. He is the super consciousness. He was able to reconstitute matter, to fertilize it, to give it a direction, to give it a purpose, to give it a moral principle, to give it a structure so that it could begin to move out of motionlessness, to achieve time out of timelessness, to achieve shape out of shapelessness, to achieve order out of chaos. Man is like that. Man, as the Egyptian thought of himself, that is why they were able to cut. No, that mountain was nothing to them. That is why with tools lesser than our tools, they were able to cut mountains of granite, build thousands of rooms under the ground, lift things that the Japanese cannot lift, move things down rivers that we cannot move down rivers anymore. They were able to do this because there was a different kind of consciousness. They saw the world differently. They saw a world which they could reshape, which they could cut again, which they could form, even as God forms and reforms the world. There were not people sitting down day after day, oh my God, AIDS are going to kill me, and if the AIDS don't get me, the white man is going to get me, and if the white man doesn't get me, so-and-so is going to get me. How can you disembowel your consciousness day after day with these thoughts and expect a powerful beam, like a laser beam, to cut through mountains? How can you expect to lift the great stones? How you can expect to reshape the world in which the early African did if all your thoughts are thoughts of powerlessness? Whatever the state of the world and whatever you may find yourself in, you have to develop a consciousness that rises. That is the meaning of the Christ. To rise out of the grave, to be born again, to be resurrected into a vitality, to be resurrected into a power, to be resurrected into a focus, into a new order. An order that already exists in consciousness, only that that consciousness has to be reshaped by a different knowledge of ourselves. So that these things we find out are not just to bloat us up in some sort of impotent way, but to give us a drive. I found that when I began to find what my people had done, I had far more energy than I had in my 20s. Because I realized energy is not physical. It comes from the spirit. The spirit, once fertilized, produces power. That power makes us greater than ordinary human beings. So you don't need melanin in your pineal gland. If you want power, it has come from a real awareness of the real power that lies in the universe. That is something that operates. Whether you believe in God or not, that is real. That is as real as physics. That kind of spiritual power is as real as physics. Just as you have atoms, which are the block of the physical universe, there is the inner atomicity of the spirit. Without that spiritual force, that thing has no shape. It's just atoms. It's just wild. A star is not as great as a man, because a star is just a mad, wild blast and explosion of energy. What is the point of all that energy? You only need one flash of a star's energy to perform a great act. But the star performs no great acts. It's just bursting wild. So we have to become aware of that. We have to have that. You look at the Egyptians, their medicine. We are startled by it when we go back to the 18th dynasty, when they translated again the Edwin Smith papyrus. They just dealt with the brain, the head, and the neck. Do you know what our doctors have found in the early African medical documents, the Edwin Smith papyrus? That these people had plotted the internal structure of the brain. They knew what part of the brain affected what part of the body. You only know that recently through X-rays. The Africans had gone so far that they found the locus in the brain where auditory information is processed. How did they do it? It's a different kind of thinking, a different kind of mentality. How could they face these impossible? They built in the Middle Kingdom 4,000 years ago. They built a 27-mile long embankment and a dam that could determine the flow of the Niger. And they were able to fertilize thousands and thousands of acres. Today, in certain parts of the world, where you have this loss of inner power, this loss of inner certainty, people are not able to think like that anymore. They don't do it, so that technology becomes almost a monster. We live in a world where, although we have technology that could send machines flying out into space, we have turned it almost upon ourselves, so that we've actually bored a hole in the curtain of the earth. We actually have a hole in the Arctic produced by our technology. We have seas where fish cannot even breathe. We have worlds of men where just to see their color, a color which is natural to the very ecology of the world. I mean, the colors of man have nothing to do with anything except responses to environment. And these things have become barriers to even being human. When you look at these things, you become aware of something else in the Egyptian. It wasn't just his technology. It wasn't just his technology. Let me close by saying it wasn't this, that. It was a different spirit. The Egyptian was taught, for example, to show pity and compassion to his brother. He was taught to share things with the hungry and the thirsty. He was taught to see the absolute value of justice and equality. Do you know they had state-supported medicine in that time among the early Egyptians? You didn't have to pay. It wasn't your wealth that determined your medical treatment. Do you know that a worker could sue a minister in the early Egyptian world? Do you know women were equal to men then? So that so that not only did they build a different universe of science, in their medicine, in their mathematics, in their time structures, but they built a different moral structure. They gave us the day. The 24-hour day is African. You take it for granted there's no such thing as a 24-hour day. On the moon, it's different. In the Arctic, it's different. In winter, it's different. In summer, it's different. In the tropics, it's different. There's no 24-hour day. The Africans made that because they knew with an exactness how long it took for the sun to move in certain direction. The Africans knew when they brought it in their metaphysics and in their sciences. They knew the second of time. They created the second of time. We take it for granted. That second is African. They created the second of arc. They gave it to the world. They were the first to talk of ecliptics. They created those things. They created geometry along the Nile. They said their arithmetic was inferior, that it was just trial and error until they tested it in 1967 in a big computer. The scientists discovered in this country, testing early African arithmetic, that of 22,295 possible decompositions, the early Africans in Egypt had chosen the 46 most elegant, which is what the computer would have chosen 4,000 years later. Therefore, let me close, because the time has come when I do have to close. There is so much more to say. Let me close by saying, as Césaire, at the height of the Negritude movement, said, when he was accused of merely saying all this and reacting in this way out of hatred and envy of the white, it is not out of hatred or envy of any race that I proclaim the greatness of my own. It is because I know that no race has a monopoly of intelligence, invention, or genius. It is because I know too that the race of man is far from finished. There is a lot to do in the world. The race of man is only just beginning, and there is room for all of us at the rendezvous of history. Thank you.
Dr. Ivan.